Hi, this is Cycle 2, Week 7 Science Sunprints. This is an excellent experiment in heliography, that is, making pictures with the rays of the sun. This is something that's really fun, and I know that your students will enjoy it. In order to do this experiment, you do need sunprint paper. There are a number of commercially available kits that can be purchased on Amazon, lots of different places. You will need that. If you're the tutor, I suggest you maybe practice this just one time, just to make sure that it goes well for you. The kits come with different kinds of pieces, but all of the kits have sun paper themselves. This kit protects it with a black plastic bag to keep the paper from being exposed to any direct light from the sun, which is of course important. It also comes with this piece of acrylic that's the same size as the paper, and we'll see what that's for here in just a second. But in order to do this experiment, in addition to the kit, you need objects of nature. So I have what I believe is a piece of wheat and a leaf. But any objects like this would work. You do need them to be relatively flat. And I would suggest at least 2 objects per student so that they can make a design with their paper. Okay? So in order to, and then the last piece that you will need is some water to develop with. Okay, so in order to set this experiment up, I remove a piece of sun paper, and what we observe is that one side is blue and one side is white, and that will become important here in just a second. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully set this piece of paper into the sunshine, and I'm going to position my objects onto it. I'm going to do my best to keep my body, the piece of paper, within the shade of my body, not exposing it directly to the sunlight just yet. And then I want to set that up. Now I'm going to put my piece of acrylic onto it and press just a little bit, just to try and flatten those objects down onto the paper. Now I'm going to move. I'm going to expose that paper to the direct sunlight. So as that process is ongoing, let's talk a little bit about the science of what is happening. So the sunprint paper is very special and unique. One side of it is blue, as I said. It's been coated with a specific molecule. It might vary a little bit from kit to kit, but they're all very similar. And traditionally, it's a molecule called Berlin green. That molecule is a polyatomic assortment of iron and cyanide. And so what happens then, and that molecule looks blue, right, as you can see. So what happens then, as we put the paper into the sunlight, then the energy of the sunlight, specifically the ultraviolet portion of the sunlight, begins to oxidize those iron atoms. It's oxidizing those iron atoms, so it's increasing their oxidation state, which changes their color and enables them to bind to the paper. They're binding to the paper. So the pieces of nature then that I put on top then are blocking the sunlight, and they're preventing that reaction from happening. So that as the paper sits in the sunlight, the oxidation is ongoing, the blue area that is exposed to the sunlight is beginning to fade. It's fading. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. It just depends a little bit on the day and the strength of the sunlight. If you have to do this experiment on a cloudy day, that's okay. I recommend, though, if possible with your director and your other tutors, that you move science up in the day so that you can expose it for a longer period of time. Maybe if you were to set up this portion of the experiment and then go inside and do another 30-minute portion of your day, I think that even on a pretty cloudy day, 30 minutes of exposure would work, because again, it's the ultraviolet light that's coming through and that's actually helping us to do this experiment. So we've been sitting here for just a couple of minutes, but let's look now at our paper. And so we can see very clearly that the blue area of the paper has begun to fade, and it looks significantly whiter, much lighter under that acrylic. And that is exactly what we were expecting. So now what I'm getting ready to do is I'm going to pick this up and we're going to take it over, remove our acrylic, we're going to remove our objects and set them aside, and then we're going to use our water. All right, so now I pick this up, trying to be very careful with it so that we can see and not move the objects that are underneath it too much. Well, so we come back now out of the direct sunlight, and we'll see that the area underneath where our objects were
cool.
very clearly are those pieces. So again, the sunlight reacted away what was exposed. And so those objects protected it. And now what I'm going to do is, very carefully, it's a little tricky and you want to kind of do it somewhat fast. I want to soak my piece of paper in water. In the Foundations Guide, they recommend doing this quickly. I think so. I think you want to do it for about 5 minutes. I'm going to put the entire piece of paper on there. Some of the commercially available sun kits that I've seen recommend just spraying it down with some water. I think that would work okay, but I think it's best to soak it. Okay, so now this is an important part. So what's going on is we're soaking it in water. The light, the ultraviolet light of the sun oxidized those iron atoms. And now the water molecules are reducing them back. They're reducing them back, and the unreacted Berlin green is highly water soluble. And that's the other trick. So what that means is that the areas where the sunlight didn't reach, that were protected by the leaf and the piece of wheat, so they looked blue, that's because those iron Berlin green molecules were not oxidized. So now, but they're water soluble. So now that we're soaking them in water, they're rinsing away. Not literally, of course, they're just dissolving into the water, but it's extracting those Berlin green molecules. And then what it's also doing is it's reducing the reacted Berlin green that temporarily had faded from blue to white that had bound to the paper. It's now reducing them back to their original oxidation state, and so now they're coming off. So as we're developing this piece of paper, then the areas that were blue in the direct sunlight will now turn white, and the rest of the paper will turn blue. And it makes a very, very pretty picture. It does take a little bit of time, and it depends on how often you're using the water. Because you are solubilizing the unreacted Berlin green, you may need to change the water, especially if it's one pan of water that you're using for multiple classes. Then I would definitely change the water each time. But even if you have a big class, you may want to change the water halfway through, or even set up a couple of pans so that the different students can do it. I think 5 to 10 minutes is sufficient in order to get that piece to go. So in just a minute, after this is done, we'll then take that piece of paper out, and then we have to let it dry. But now at this point, the sun image is fixed, and so it should remain. So again, the outline of the shapes of what we had put down, the students had put down, will be white. The rest of the paper will be blue. So here's an example of one that I did a little bit earlier. And so you can see the paper itself is blue, and where I had my wheat and I had my maple leaf, it's very clearly shown. So in this particular case, you can see a little bit of blending, right? It's very, very white towards the base. That's where the sunlight was most effectively blocking. There was a little bit of three-dimensional shape to the leaf, and that's why the outline of the leaf is clearly visible, but it's a little bit more of a darker blue. It's not quite as white, as brilliant white. In order to try and correct that, you can get objects that are perfectly flat, but I think natural objects are better, and I think the kids will enjoy it. So you may want to put the piece of acrylic down on top of them to push them down, but just understand that if that's what you see, then that's how you explain to your students what's happening. It just means there was a little bit of rays of the object to the paper, and so it wasn't blocking the sunlight completely. This is a very cool experiment. I know the kids will enjoy it. This is Cycle 2, Week 7 Sun Prints.